people need to understand Trump. Like, what's Trump's book? It's The Art of the Deal.
Yes.
And so he's going
Yes.
to over-threaten tariffs, and he is going to implement some tariffs, but he's not going to implement as many tariffs as he alluded to. That is the art of the deal, people. That's how it works. Like, Trump is, some people might love him or hate him, but recognize that there's only about 3,000 billionaires on planet Earth, and he's one of them. So, 8 billion people on planet Earth, 3,000 of them are billionaires. It's like, yeah, he had a 200 million head start from an inheritance, but like, he didn't mess it up. A lot of people have messed up. There's a lot more people who've messed up $200 million being inherited rather than, turn it into $5 billion.
Oh,
so,
for sure. I mean, if you didn't have, the wherewithal, the acumen, and, just the personality to take that 200 million and turn it into billions, you could easily like ruin your life and get rid of that, in a short order. Right?
There would be billionaires that I detest, like a George Soros, but I'm watching the documentary. I'm still a student. I still want to know what happened, how he thought. Like it's still, it's still impressive in an evil way. I actually want to understand the fundamentals of it, because it's like you have to be very astute, right? So even when someone you don't like acquires that wealth, it's like you need to understand how it happened, because they didn't do it because they were an idiot. So it's very, very important to to kind of realize, like, to have that humility to look at people like that say that they're not idiots, right? And so I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. So we're talking like the two industries probably in the crosshairs: lumber and dairy, right?
Yeah, lumber and dairy. So we've got a cartel in the dairy sector, right? Mainly, I believe it's to secure a lot of the votes in Quebec. And they're also, because they're subsidizing and they're controlling the supply, like we pay a ridiculous amount for dairy in Canada. But because of those subsidies, they're selling cheaper milk products to the U.S., right?
Yeah, I mean, okay. If you have to have a subsidy to guarantee your own country has supply, that's one thing. But when you have a subsidy to the extent that it allows to not just fulfill the supply in your own country, but flood a neighboring country's market with, cheap products, it's like, that's kind of what tariffs are for. It's kind of to like avoid that I don't know, for better term, like the jackassery, right?
Yeah.
And really, when you really sit there and think about it, it's like, that's not really an effective use of our tax dollars either. Like, in the immediate term, it's like, okay, I guess it keeps people working. But in the long term, it's like, you're really just subsidizing an inefficient industry that isn't going to survive on its own, right? And so, in the short term, it's going to hurt. And in the long term, it's going to, hopefully redeploy capital to a more efficient area. So, that's just kind of the reality of it, right? Those are single digits. I think I was looking them up this morning. It's like, between the two of them, those are, call it 4% of our GDP or something like that. And so let's just say they have let's be pessimistic, and they have a 20% downturn. Okay, they got a 20% downturn. It's like, so you're talking 20% of 4% people. So
very small.
It's a reduction. It's going to hurt. It's coming, and it's for the long term. It might be warranted, because that's not where I want my tax dollars going in the long term, is to create an industry that can subsidize and undercut foreign industries. Like, that's
and what really irks me is, a video came online on X, I think it was early this year, and it was a dairy farmer in Canada that he basically had to dump all of the milk. Just had to dump it all because he produced too much. So all of his cows are being milked. He's feeding them. He's taking care of them, paying for vet bills, energy bills, and so forth, for the milk to just get dumped down the drain. Why couldn't that be sold and given to like people who are underprivileged? Why couldn't we do something else with that? Sell it to a different market. That kind of really pisses me off, that we're dumping good food down the drain in order to help the cartel in Canada. But, that's just my opinion.
Then, I mean, but we look at these tariffs, and then there's kind of two options, or two possible outcomes. It's like, okay, is the U.S. going to get rolling in their economy again? And I want to pull something up on the screen because I've pulled up, and I think we've talked about the Canadian money supply before.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we've talked about like the U.S. money supply. And so it's incredibly, incredibly tight, right? You look at this is a long-term historical, and you can see the massive increase in the money supply. It was actually much more significant. It was actually much more significant increase in the money supply in the U.S. than it was in Canada. It was basically the U.S. exporting their inflation to the rest of the world.
Let's do a zoom in on that.
Yeah. So if you zoom in to here, it's just like here we go. It's like clicking along at 14 trillion. Kind of in 2019, we'll call it even 15 trillion, and then bang, 21, 22 trillion. Like just absolutely massive expansion in the money supply. But since then, it's actually been one of the tightest fiscal periods in history. Where the M2 money supply was 21 trillion in April of 2022. And it's actually under that a little bit, but effectively it's still 21 trillion, 2.5 years later. So that's a really, if you do not increase that money supply, it's like it's not really going to get cooking. If you look at under the hood in the U.S. too, it's like they got a lot of the same stuff that were happening in Canada. You look at their jobs numbers, it's like they're inflated and they're continually revised down, and we start looking at what's driving it. It's public sector jobs that are driving it, not private sector jobs. That's just not a sustainable outlook, right? And so if you have two scenarios, if you have one where it's like just increase of fiscal spending and potentially looking towards a debt spiral in the U.S., which is our largest trading partner, or you have the U.S. that's basically going in the right direction but implements some tariffs on a couple of industries, which one is the tougher situation? It's like the tougher situation is that the U.S. economy is in a recession. Like,
for sure.
If the U.S. economy is in a recession, tariffs or not, that's harder, right? But if the U.S. economy is cooking and we have a couple of tariffs to deal with, comparatively speaking, that's an easier situation for us to deal with.
Yeah,
right?
kind of a nothing burger in comparison with, a booming U.S. economy. If that goes raging for the next 4 years coming up, that is only going to benefit Canada because, like you said, they're our largest trading partner. They need some of the raw materials that we've got, including energy. Right? Energy is a huge, huge component of what we provide for them.
This is why I've always, remained bullish on Canada. And this is kind of my thought process in most of the world. I think most of the world they're going to see what happens to the U.S. dollar. Like you can already see the exodus for the people coming to the boot camp, or I'm just going to show you the exact stats of the exodus out of the U.S. dollar and into gold around the world. It's like you're not looking for a Lehman Brothers moment there where that's going to implode, but like you can just slowly see them selling off U.S. treasuries and buying gold. And it's been happening for a decade now. So that's going to continue to happen. And so it's going to turn into the countries, I believe, the countries that have resources and the ones that don't have resources. Like it's going to become very, very binary and very, very difficult to outperform if you're not in one of those boats, right? So like, can you be a Switzerland and outperform despite not having a significant amount of you can, and that's a great example because they might do it, but there'll be very few examples like that. It's going to be less, dominated with the U.S. dollar enforcing their will because the demand for U.S. treasuries will be smaller and smaller, but the demand for resources will be the true, equalizer, right? And, really the path out for Canada has always been the same way. It's higher productivity, natural resource jobs. Like,
yes,
that is the path out. And we don't just have to sell them to the U.S. We can sell them to wherever they want, right? And does the U.S. need our oil. It's like you heard Trump and he's talking. He's like, we have more oil than Saudi Arabia. Well, unless we includes Canada, you don't. You just don't. Mathematically, you do not.
We have
so
that
who
many
is
resources,
the we?
right?
Because those oil reserves are pretty poignant, right? When I talk to my American friends, they're radically surprised that the province of Alberta has more oil than the entirety of the U.S. Like the province of Alberta, probably even most Canadians would be surprised to know that the province of Alberta has more proven oil reserves than the entirety of the U.S. And that's just a mathematical fact, right?
Yeah, in the Americas, we have North America, we have the largest reserves, proven oil reserves, more than all of North America.
Yeah.
And we're third in the world. Third in the world. Amazing.
People point to Venezuela. They're like, oh, Venezuela has so much oil. Dig deeper on Venezuela. And anyone who says that, dig deeper. The oil is further in the ground. It's at a deeper depth than the Canadian oil sands. The terrain is not as consistent. So it's, it's soft in some places, more dense in other places. That makes it much more costly to mine. A significant, more of the portion is actually offshore. So you see that big number in Venezuela, but proximity to the U.S., it matters. It's further away. It's harder to ship it there. And B, it's more costly to mine it there. So unless they were dramatically better run than Canada, it's like Canada will still be the better option. And so, we could run Canada dramatically worse and still be run dramatically better than Venezuela.
Well, I think that's part of the problem. I agree with Kevin Leary. Canada is one of the richest countries in the world with very poor management.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get some better management.
Yeah, and so that's why I can continue. The U.S. economy gets cooking. When you look at the underlying U.S. energy reserves, when we start looking at it, it's like if the economies around the world are rolling, they use more energy. That's just how it works. And when you really look at shale wells and how much oil they actually have, it's like they're very short-lived. They just do not have as much. Okay, so when you're trying to get oil out of shale wells, it's like it's more costly. They don't last for the same length period of time, and so eventually the U.S. will become more and more constricted on energy. Proportionally speaking, Canada has a ridiculous amount of wealth of resources, and what's the main threat to oil and gas? It's not solar and wind; it's nuclear. And where is the most high-grade plutonium in the world? It's in southern Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
That's just where it is.
Baby.
That's just where it is.